One set of stories that I find very interesting, given what we now remember about the Aztecs, has to do with human sacrifice. Human sacrifice was one element of the religion of the Mesoamericans. Prisoners of war were sometimes put to death, not large numbers, but occasionally. The Aztecs brought this to a high art. The Aztecs, as their power grew, used it as a terror tactic to frighten other city-states into joining them. They would say, if you don't join us, then we're going to take dozens of your young people and sacrifice them. If you do, then that'll be fine. So politics became involved, and then it grew to be a much larger phenomenon, the one that gave birth to the legend that we have now. The Spaniards, after the conquest, did their best to spread the notion of the Aztecs as having been intrinsically and permanently people who liked to kill hundreds of other people, that they even felt that they must do this, etc. But the Nahuatl language sources tell a different story. At one point, they're having a huge celebration of a 52-year cycle, which is like their century. And the king of the Aztecs, of the Mexica, says, to celebrate this marvelous and important occasion, this was in the very early 1500s, I will be generous and give 20 captives. And he says that I will make sure that the other main city-states, Texcoco and Tlacopan, that their kings also each give 20 captives. So we're talking about the death of 60 people in this ceremony. That's pretty horrible, but it doesn't match the hundreds and hundreds that we've been told by Spaniards were killed constantly. Okay? But then there are other references that are more poetic that I think help give rise to the later notion. The Mexica, or actually the Mesoamericans in general, counted symbolically. They had a base 20 system. So one symbol and one word was the word for 20. Another symbol, a head of hair, and a picture of a sort of a feather-like head of hair, was 400, 20 times 20. And then another symbol, a big sack, was for 8,000, 400 times 20. That was a shikipili. And in both the written sources and the pictorial sources, when you wanted to say that a lot of people had died, you'd say, shikipili, shikipilis, 8,000, 8,000, sort of. Nobody could really believe that in one battle fought with between just a few thousand people on each side at most with stone arrows that, 8,000 sets of 8,000 people had died. This was just a poetic way of talking about it. Well, there are a couple of places in the record where they talk about sacrifice this way. On a big day, maybe the celebration of the 52-year century, we are going to sacrifice, shikipilis of people. And so some people have actually done the math, scholars did, and they've said, that means that in one day they killed 32,000 people. Okay, it staggers the imagination. There are no caches of skulls or that reflect those kinds of numbers. In the Stone Age, they didn't really have the technological capability to do that. But of course, when you understand their number system, that's their poetic way of saying, a lot of people are going to die. They didn't intend for it to be taken literally. The other record was a very literal record. We've got to make this a big party, so I'm going to come up with 20. You better come up with 20 also. But we, coming into these records at first, I think we're not very good at judging what was a sort of poetic or exaggerated story, a kind of figurative story, and what was probably a literal record of what they had done. Different moments in time were sort of appropriate to the different projects. So I think the stories that they told about themselves regarding, we're going to have, say, 4 sets of shikipili, of sacrifice victims, ironically, unintentionally, ended up corroborating their horrific reputation in the eyes of the world's posterity, which is not why they were doing that. They were just showing off their power. But I think it did have that effect. Now, the Spaniards were motivated to tell the stories and remember the stories in certain ways because they wanted to show that these Aztecs were horrible people who had deserved to be conquered and that people were much better off under the Spaniards. But I will say that the Aztecs contributed to that themselves with these sort of wild poetic numbers that they threw around in various occasions, not just about sacrifice victims, about jewels too. He's supposed to come up with, 4 sets of shikipili of turquoise. I don't think they meant it.